right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Billy Dees. If this is your first time checking out the podcast, first of all, welcome. I'm absolutely thrilled that you found the program. We are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. And interestingly, what I'm going to talk about today, and kind of, I'm always open to feedback on this. And that is, what kind of content, when you're a creator, should you be doing around the holidays? And it's a little bit more nuanced than what it sounds like. For example, I'm not the type of show that's going to give anybody a lecture on the true meaning of Christmas. Okay. That is not going to happen. But as a creator, this is especially with, in my case, I'll talk about podcasting because that's kind of the wheelhouse that I'm in. Podcast listeners very much are creatures of habit. And this became apparent during the pandemic, when the pandemic was at its worst. The general wisdom was, people are home, right? And they're not going to do that much. So, there's only so many TV programs they can watch. So they're going to consume a lot of content online. And the fact of the matter is it really didn't work out that way. Now, it depends on what your media of choice was and what kind of content, you happen to consume or create. But in the case of podcasting, what happened is my audience, for example, they listen to the podcast while they are doing other things. And the majority of time during the week, that's going to be maybe commuting, or it's going to be on their lunch break or some other thing. So when the pandemic was in full swing, those patterns of behavior, that structure was not in place. All right. They just kind of freewheeled through the day. They got up and they got online, and if they could work at home, if they were lucky enough to have a job where they could work at home, and, they were in their pajamas, they didn't have the routine of getting ready for work, getting dressed and driving to work. That structure was not there. So during that year, when the pandemic was at its height, there were a lot of fluctuations in terms of podcast listening, video watching, all these other things that logically you would say during the pandemic, people are just going to be watching this stuff all the time, right? But it didn't work out that way. And this kind of leads us into what I'm asking about during the holidays, because it's not just a matter of whether or not you want to do Christmas material. I personally am not going to do that. Like I said, I remember one time the producers of Seinfeld once said that they were never going to do an episode where a character on the program discovered the true meaning of Christmas. That was never going to be an episode. And that's kind of like me and podcasting, but it's not just the holiday material. It is the fact that holidays in general, I experienced this on July 4th weekend, Memorial Day weekend, and not so much on Labor Day for whatever reason, but Memorial Day is another one where your patterns get broken. Okay. You take time off from work. You have plans to be with family. You have, plans to be outside in the backyard cooking out and all of these other things. And it's not just a matter of being busy during the holidays. The general wisdom is people, the listenership goes down during the holidays because people are busy doing other things. That's true in some sense, but the real issue is that their normal patterns get broken. This is especially true like the week leading up to Christmas, and then that period between Christmas and New Year's. That can be a real tough nut to crack. That's where a lot of people take vacation time and they do other things. And their patterns of how they normally consume content get broken. And this is not just a problem for online creators, but it's a problem for standard broadcasters as well. if you notice, a lot of your favorite TV programs will go on a hiatus shortly after Thanksgiving until after the first of the year, because they know that the patterns of normal viewing, sitting down on Tuesday night to watch your favorite program at 8:00, that just isn't happening. You're not just being busy and doing other things, but you're totally preoccupied with a different schedule for a period of weeks. So why is this an issue? Well, for one thing, I know a lot of podcasts do, kind of like seasons, episode 7 and season 2. I never did that. Okay. I in all the years that this podcast has been on, I've never done that. The podcast is pretty much on all year round. Sometimes on Christmas week, obviously we'll skip a week, but for the most part, we keep this going all the time. Skip a week here or there at various times a year, but to go off for a month or two is just not something that we've ever done. But by the same token, if I have, let's say, premium content, I know that this is going to be something that my audience is going to love. I have an author, or I have some sort of a person with some sort of a cause they're championing, something going on in the community, and it's something that's right up the alley of my audience. Am I going to put it on during that time? Probably not. I'm probably going to wait until January to do that. So what do I do with this time, late in December? I don't just want to, be gone. I don't like to do that. I got a phobia about that. I know people have told me that it really doesn't make any difference, but I have a phobia about that. I like to keep the show going, and we do get listens during that period. So I feel that I have an obligation to the listeners that, come in and check in once a week or whatever to hear the podcast. But by the same token, I know that my premium material will only get maybe, 3/4 of the listens that it normally would during a regular time of year. So what do I do? What do I do with that during that time period? I don't just want to create content for the sake of creating it, but obviously a lot of my premium guests and all that aren't even available during that time, unless I pre-record them a month in advance or something like that. And here again, it wouldn't get the audience that it normally would anyway. There's a couple of things that I have done in the past, and that's kind of what we're doing right here today. Is I sometimes will just simply do a program that gives insights into the things that we have done in terms of how we produce the podcast, how we do certain things, the business of podcasting, the business of digital media. And people are interested in those things. Even if they don't do them as a living or do them as a hobby, people will listen in on those types of programs, and I've done them before, and they've been relatively successful. Another thing that I have done is to cover things that I normally wouldn't throughout the rest of the year. And for me, that's kind of difficult because I really don't have a genre per se. I mean, if I find a certain topic that's really hot and is worth discussion, we'll roll with it. And I don't care if it's the middle of July or whether it's the middle of January, we'll do it. But there are times when we will do things that maybe outside of the norm for me, something that I wouldn't even consider. And here again, I always preface that when I do the program, I tell the audience, this is the time of year when we kind of don't have our regular guests available. So we're going to talk about, X, Y, Z. And sometimes those shows get a fair amount of listens, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that at all. And the other thing that we will often do here, and I've done this numerous times throughout the year, but I'll do this especially during the holidays. I don't know if I'm going to do it this year, but we will have somebody on, and we will simply have a very free wheeling format. I kind of, what a lot of podcasters don't do, I've noticed. I come from the world of digital creation that encompasses a history of traditional audio production, and production work for radio and all these other things. And the one thing that a quote unquote broadcaster will do when somebody asks me, well, what's the difference between, let's say, a broadcaster and somebody who records podcasts? Obviously, there's nothing written in stone. But one of the key things is that a broadcaster being live, when something happens, when something goes wrong, when a guest doesn't show up, this kind of separates the amateurs from the pros. When your producer leans over and says, "Hey, we got a problem here. This guest isn't showing up. It's another 45 minutes before the next guest is supposed to call in, and you're on your own until this other guest comes on." I have always tried to have something prepared, but in those moments when you're giving that moment, that's the difference between a broadcaster and a podcaster, because I've worked with some very talented people. I always do best with prepared material, but there are people out there, and I've worked with some pretty incredible ones, that in those moments when those time periods hit and you have to go live, like Bill O'Reilly, we're doing it live, we have to go live, and you have something gone wrong and you are the show for the next period of time. I've worked with people, you can, like the cliche says, you can give them a phone book. You can give them a menu from the restaurant next door. You can give them whatever, and they will get a half hour out of material out of it. There's just something about them that they come alive in those moments. And this time of year, sometimes what I like to do is I'll often talk to previous guests where we've done structured shows and said, hey, let's pick 3 topics out of the news and let's go and, let's riff, as they call it. Like musicians will often riff. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll get some podcasters together, some content creators, with nothing really even prepared. Now you have to, if you're going to go live, you have to be able to trust these people, because obviously, you don't want them to say something really off the wall. But for the most part, anything goes, and that's part of it. And you can sometimes create a show that has a magic that a lot of times the more structured shows don't have. It's having a show that's well planned, and you have your content ready, you have your facts together. That has the makings of a professional show most of the time. Those can, some will turn out better than others, but there's always a certain, I'll say, lane of quality there that is going to work well. You don't typically dip below that. But the downside of that is you don't particularly have a spark that goes through the ceiling either. There's a certain safe lane that a well-prepared show will stay in. Okay. And sometimes when you do these free wheeling ones, sometimes they're a total disaster. They're a total dud. But on the other hand, you can have moments of greatness. You can have just, whether it be funny or whether you stumble across an insight or an observation that you can roll with, that will just blow the audience away. Some of my most listened to episodes over the history, going back years with this podcast, some of the ones that have had the most listens and consistent listens over a period of time have been those shows that were totally just put together like that. Now, here again, I would not recommend that as your modus of operandi. That is not something that you should count on happening every week. But in these moments, like we're getting into with the holidays, and you want to experiment a little bit, this is a good time to take a chance like that. This is a good time to maybe do a show that is totally unscripted, and go some places that you wouldn't normally go. So anyway, that's kind of the quandary that I am in this time of year when it comes to creating content, because during the holidays, I don't want to do holiday oriented material. I'm not one of these people that, I won't even speak of it. It's not that, but I'm not going to do a show that's centered around the holiday spirit and all this. That's just not my gig, right? And by the same token, I think everybody would agree when you have a dip this time of year, you don't want to put on premium content because it's not going to get the listens that it normally gets. The bulk of your audience may miss it. And by the same token, though, you just don't want to let this time of year slide. You don't want to let it go into a void. You don't want to have this huge gap in your playlist. I really have worked hard over the years to make sure there's not a 2 or 3 month gap in the playlist. That's something that we just simply, especially in the last number of years, have worked very hard not to let happen. So what's the solution? There has to be something, something that's worthwhile. If you have a suggestion for me, hey, I am all ears. I would like to hear, what do you listen to? Obviously, the content landscape changes because people are doing exactly what I'm doing. They're either dropping off this time of year, or they're doing content that they don't normally do, or they're prepping their shows for January. And we're doing that here. We have January almost completely booked up with our interview schedule. And, they're doing those types of things. So as you're skipping around the internet, what are you running into? I'd be really interested to find out. What do you look for this time of year? Do you enjoy holiday-oriented material, messages about the holiday, whether it be from different faiths or all these other things, the giving season, the giving spirit, the generosity that we all should be, putting forth? I can tell you that, for me anyway, I kind of believe in the generosity of spirit that should be going on all year round. But that's just me. And there's times that others would argue, well, the holidays are a time to celebrate that, which is fine. That's absolutely fine. But here again, I kind of believe that spirit should be around all year long. So if you're not looking at that type of stuff, what are you looking for? Are you looking at some of your favorite creators that do things like I do that's out of the ordinary, stuff that they don't normally do during the course of the year? Is that something you search out? And with your change in schedule, how has that affected the shows that you listen to and some of the patterns of stuff that you do in terms of do you spend time on various apps differently during the holidays? So do you find the content this time of year not particularly appealing? And do you kind of just pass it over? All these things, I'd be curious to know what some of the views are in terms of how you can consume content. In the meantime, I do want to tell you briefly, the Billy D's podcast can be found just about anywhere on your favorite podcasting platform. And you can also follow me on Twitter. And I have to tell you, to paraphrase an old axiom, the reports of Twitter's demise have been greatly exaggerated, at least so far. Twitter is going through some changes, and quite frankly, social media is due for a lot of changes. The structure of how social media, the business model of social media, which has existed pretty much since its inception, which this is 2022, depending on how you define social media and how this all started. Let's say it's going back 15 years, something like that, maybe a little longer. The business model has always been to get people to engage on the platform and create a marketplace where you have targeted advertising based upon their behavior. And some of it is ethical. Some people may say not so much. But the business model of that is starting to change because there's so many social media platforms now and people jumping around on them so much that there has to be a more stable way for these platforms to exist. I like the idea, in short, of a social media platform of one kind or another where you pay a fee to use it. I believe that benefits the platform, and I believe it benefits the user, because as someone who is contributing to the platform as a consumer, as a user, as a paying user, your voice is more valuable that way than it is just someone who's using it for free in some haphazard manner and is letting themselves become a target for advertising. If you kind of examine the business model of Twitter, they were due for some big changes, whether Elon took it over or not. It had to change. It was losing money. Facebook the same way. Their whole meta plan and other things, that was all part of what I'm talking about. There had to be changes, and in their case, they went to the metaverse and Oculus and some of these other things. That was probably one of their better moves, was acquiring Oculus. But anyway, they're going through their changing pains, like growing pains. They're having growing pains over there. And of course, there's the rise of TikTok and what Instagram has tried to counter with Reels and YouTube Shorts, and we could go on and on with this. But the social media landscape was due for some changes. The business model that has been in place since the inception of social media was due to change. So with that being said, I believe that the changes over at Twitter were inevitable and they had to happen. It just so happens that Elon was the one who stepped in and pushed things along a little bit. With that also being said, this has also caused a disruption for podcasters because I got to tell you, for the most part, Twitter is built for podcasting. It's built for any type of macro thing. And here's what I mean by that. Anything that can be consumed anywhere. So a podcast, podcast can be listened to anywhere in the world. If you're an author in this digital age, people can buy your book digitally or in some other way, pretty much anywhere. Same with your music. If you are a musician, same goes. Anywhere in the world, people can consume your music. If you are a content creator of some type, a vlogger, and if you have some kind of a social cause, or you're doing makeup, whatever it is, Twitter can be a great catalyst in terms of driving people to your content. Twitter, more than any other platform, in my opinion, is trending. When you hear that word, something is trending, that usually means on Twitter. It's more real time, way more real time than anything going on Facebook. I like LinkedIn for professional reach, but things are really lagging there. Like a broadcast signal when they say there's a delay. Yeah. With LinkedIn, there's a delay of about a week. A blip happens today, and it doesn't show up on LinkedIn until like a week later. So Twitter is probably very trending. Anytime there's an election, a presidential debate, some sort of a breaking news story, people are on Twitter in real time following it. And that is a great way to drive content for your content marketing strategy. I'm a big believer in that. And with all the distractions over at Twitter here the past number of weeks and maybe the last month or two, that here again, it's a growing pain. And my usual patterns of behavior on Twitter have changed slightly. And, that's okay with me, though, because like I said, those changes had to happen. Twitter also has a built-in component of what's been called now social audio in the form of Twitter Spaces. And Twitter Spaces here again, because of all the uncertainty, there's been a lot of people trying out some of the other apps, whether it be Wisdom, Clubhouse, Fireside. I believe there's one, the Spotify Live, and Discord. Discord is another one. That platform has been around a long time. I've recently gave it a try. I haven't spent a lot of time on it. My only concern with Discord is bringing people, like Twitter has a built-in, like I said, a built-in audience for just about anything. All right. Those people are already there. If they follow authors, they follow books, they follow the writing community, all those really big hashtags on Twitter, those people are already there. You don't have to bring them somewhere else to have a Twitter space. They're already natively right on the platform. So in that case, I feel that Twitter has an advantage over some of these other social audio apps. But obviously, some of these social audio apps, the argument could be people are on them strictly for social audio. They're that's why they're there, is they want the audio. So you have a more dedicated audience for audio, and I get that. And that's why I'm doing some of these various social audio apps as well. So anyway, that all kind of feeds into my issue with content this time of year, because here again, a lot of creators who are these Twitter Spaces hosts, and I'm one of them. I don't do them on a regular basis, but I do Twitter Spaces every so often. A lot of times when I have a big author or something like that on the podcast, I will encourage them to do a Twitter Space with me as well. And for the most part, those are very successful. I don't know that I would use a social audio space, room, what have you, as a means of production. I'm not there yet. I probably wouldn't do that. And what I mean by that is that's how I'm going to produce my podcast from now on. I'm going to do them on these live forums. My heart is really in studio production for the bulk of my content. And here again, that's not to say I won't experiment once in a while. And the live aspect, the live interaction is something that a lot of times is very worthwhile. So that's kind of my kind of spiel on that. Here again, if you have any ideas for the types of content that myself or somebody else, creators in general, should be doing this time of year during that holiday lull, let's call it, that little bit of territory between, let's say right after Thanksgiving, a week or two in after that, going up to Christmas and New Year's. That 2 to 3 week period there, that can be a tough area to try to fill, because I want to stay active during that time. But obviously people are doing other things. Their patterns of behavior have changed. Their listening patterns have changed. I will tell you that if you do come up with something and you would like to tweet me, please feel free to do that. And you can do that on Twitter at Billy Dees, and just about all the social media platforms. I don't have any variations on my name. It's either Billy Dees or the Billy Dees Podcast. So I'm really easy to find, whether it be, we have a Facebook page for the podcast. We're on Instagram. I don't do terribly a lot on Instagram, but Twitter is probably my social media home. And in the bio of my Twitter account, you will find links to where most of the platforms are that carry the Billy Dees podcast, as well as other social media platforms that we are on. All right. Well, that's kind of what I was going to try to explain today in terms of content during the holiday season. It can be a time where, it's a good place to get creative if you want to do that. And a lot of times it's a place where you just have to, ride through it, do the best you can to put the best content that you can for that time period that fits into what your audience wants. So anyway, that's kind of what I was going to talk about today. I hope I shed some insight on what creators like myself go through this time of year. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Once again, I am Billy Dees, and we will talk to you again next week. I'm Billy Dees, and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.